Hi everyone. So today we will continue discuss about central nervous system. We will focus on spinal cord today. So just as a reminder that nervous system is divided into central nervous system and peripheral nervous system based on structure. The central nervous system consists of brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system consists of nerve that is divided into two types, which is cranial nerve, the nerve that enter or exit from the brain, and the spinal nerve, the nerves that enter or exit from the spinal cord. So today we are in this discussion, which is central nervous system, and we will discuss this spinal cord. Okay, spinal cord is actually continuations of the brain. Just for your information, brain and spinal cord are actually one organ, and they are protected by the same membrane. It's called the meninges that has three layers: dura mater, arachnoid layer, and pia mater. So they are the same organ or one organ that protected by the same membrane is called the meninges. So the spinal cord, this is a slender column of nervous tissue, and this is continuations of the brain. Okay, remember the last part of the brain is the brainstem, and the spinal cord will be continue from this brainstem. It extends downward until the vertebral canal, and it stops actually at vertebrae, lumbar vertebrae number 2 and number 1. So between number 1, L1 and L2. So if you see this picture, okay, it starts from this brainstem, which is the medulla oblongata, down, and then it stops here, okay, in lumbar vertebrae, between lumbar vertebrae number 1 and number 2. Okay, this is vertebrae number 1 and number 2. And from each segments of the vertebrae that will exit the nerve. So the spinal nerve exit from the spinal cord through the segments of vertebrae. And total there are 31 segments of vertebrae. Therefore, there will be 31 pairs of spinal nerve. And the spinal nerve will be grouped based on the locations of the vertebrae. Like, for example, the spinal nerve that exit from the cervical vertebrae will be named and number as C, which is mean cervical. So C1 until C8. So this is spinal nerve number 1 until number 8. And then continue with the spinal nerve that exit from thoracic vertebrae. And there are 12 segments, so it's going to be T1 until T12. And it will continue with lumbar vertebrae, and there are 5 segments. So there will be L1 until L5. And in the sacrum, there is also 5 segments. So there will be 5 spinal nerve that exit from the sacral area, and only 1 from coccyx. So C coccyx 1, only 1 pairs. So this is the total number of spinal nerve, okay, that exit from the spinal cord. So there are 31 pairs. Now the structure of spinal nerve, there are several portions that actually enlarge, and this enlargement supplies some nerve for the upper limb and also for the lower limbs, which is our arm, and our legs over here. Okay, so the one that supply the upper limb, it is coming from the cervical enlargement in the cervical area, in the neck area. So this is cervical enlargement, and the one that supply the lower limbs is in the lumbar enlargement. Okay. Conus medullaris, okay, this one over here is the end of the spinal cord, and from this conus medullaris there will be many nerves that make shape like tail, the horse tail. Therefore, the name is cauda equina, and it will end into filum terminal. Okay, so filum terminal is the end of this structure. Now, if we make a cross section of the spinal cord, so mainly you will see some grooves and also fissura, which is, so this one is fissura, which is part that divide the spinal cord into left and right sides. So we have on the dorsal area or posterior area, there is a sulcus, it's called the posterior sulcus, while in the ventral or anterior area, it has fissura. It will divide the spinal cord into left and right side. And if you see in the middle, there will be darker color, and this is what we call the gray matter. Yeah, it looks like butterfly. It will make what we call the horn. So there are 4 horns of this gray matter. It is gray, it is darker because in this part of the spinal cord, the cell body of neurons are located. So this is the place for the cell body of neurons, okay, especially interneurons, because interneurons are the neurons that's located in the CNS, brain, and the spinal cord. So the dark or darker area or gray area means this is the processing area, because the function of the cell body of neuron is to process information. Okay? So this is the processing area of the spinal cord. And this processing area of the gray matter is surrounded by the white matter. So this is white area on the dorsal. This is white in the lateral area. So white matter, and this is also white matter in the anterior area. So the dark or the gray matter is surrounded by the white matter. And then what is white matter? White matter is actually where the axons of neurons are located. So if it is the cell body, then the axon will be here. So axon is actually fiber. It has white shiny color because of the myelin sheath. So white means axon, which is there is no process in this white matter. There is only pathway or track of information, whether up, which is from spinal cord to the brain, is called the ascending track, or from the brain to the spinal cord is called the descending track. So the white matter is only pathway or track. There is no process in the white matter. The gray matter that's surrounding the central canal. So this is the central canal, the white area over here. So this gray area around this canal is called the gray commissura. Okay, so this gray commissura is the one that surrounds the central canal of the spinal cord. Okay, the white matter. Okay, white matter surrounds the gray matter, and the gray matter is the processing area. It's arranged in horns. So there are 4 horns on that gray matter. Now the main functions of the spinal cord. First, this is actually the center for spinal reflexes. So reflex is a very fast action because it is actually not going to the brain. It will be processed by the spinal cord directly. Okay, so for example, if we step on the very sharp object, so our receptor will receive that pain, and then it will be carried by the sensory neurons into the spinal cord. In the spinal cord, there is a motor neuron that will process that information and give the order directly to the motor neurons. And the motor neurons will carry the order to the effector, which is our muscle. So we can contract our muscle and take our foot away from the sharp object. So if you see that reflex, there is no connection to the brain at all. Right? So that's what we call the reflex. Very fast action, and the process mostly done by this spinal cord. So spinal cord is the center for reflexes. Another functions, the gray matter, remember, this is the processing area. So the spinal cord will process or integrate information, okay, from the receptor, and then integrate that, and then carry it to the brain. Brain will give the order, and the spinal cord will integrate that order also in the gray matter. And finally, the gray matter, the interneuron in the gray matter of the spinal cord will send the order to the motor neuron. Motor neuron carry the order to the effectors to do the response or action. So this is the function of the spinal cord, which is also for integrations between sensory information that coming and also motor informations that coming to the spinal cord. And remember the white matter, and the white matter is the track. So another function of spinal cord is carry information to the brain or from the brain using this white matter, using this track. Of course, there will be 2 types of track. There will be ascending track, which is the track that up, okay, from the spinal cord. So this is from the spinal cord up to the brain. So this is ascending track. It will carry the sensations, okay, informations about sensations. And then the second type will be descending track down, right, which is from the brain to the spinal cord. And this track will carry motor or order, right, from the brain. Okay, so the ascending track carry sensory information from spinal cord to the brain. The descending track carry order from the brain to spinal cord. Okay, based on this function, then the ascending track is also known as sensory track because it carry sensation. The descending track is also called as motor track because it is carry order for action. Now we're gonna discuss a little bit about reflex. I mentioned before, reflex is very fast action. It will not involve the brain. So just the process, all the process will be done by the interneurons in the spinal cord. Okay. This reflex will have 5 components. So this is the reflex arc component. So the first ones will be the receptors over here. Okay, let's say we receive information or we step on the nail in a sharp object. Then the receptor in our skin will receive that information. And that information will be carried by the second component of the reflex arc, is the sensory neuron. Carry that information into the spinal cord. So just for your information, the sensory neuron cell body is actually located outside the spinal cord in the area is called the dorsal root or posterior root. So this is the cell body of the sensory neuron. Carry the pain information, for example, to the spinal cord. Of course, it will have connection with the interneuron in the gray matter, okay, in the gray matter. So this is the third component is going to be, which is interneurons of the spinal cord in the gray matter. Then the interneuron will give the order. It process and finally give order to respond. And this order will be carried by the fourth component, which is the motor neuron. Look at this motor neuron. The cell body is actually located in the gray matter. Okay, so you can compare between the sensory neurons and motor neuron. Both of them is actually part of the PNS because they are located in the nerve. However, the motor neuron cell body is located inside the spinal cord. Okay, but still, the motor neuron is part of the peripheral nerve system, right? Because this is part of the nerve. So this is nerve. Okay, so this is nerve that carry both the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. The fourth component over here, the motor neurons, will carry order into the fifth component, which is the effector. And the effector, mostly muscles and gland, in this case is muscle, skeletal muscle. And then the skeletal muscle will retract our foot, for example, our leg, that maybe step on this sharp object. Okay, so this is how the reflex done, okay, by this motor neuron in the spinal cord. There is no connection to the brain. Okay, so this is reflex. This is to maintain some homeostasis that sometimes we have to do it faster and don't need the brain involved in this process. Okay, again, this is the 5 components of the reflex arc. The number 1 is the receptor, is receive the information, so especially the dendrites, of the sensory neuron, or maybe there is special cell receptor that will receive that information. And this receptor is sensitive to a specific type of stimulus or changes. The second component will be sensory neurons. This is the one that will carry or conduct the impulses from receptor to the brain or spinal cord. And because this is reflex, mostly it will go to the spinal cord without going to the brain. And the interneurons, this is the neuron that doing the process in the central nervous system. And because this is reflex, the interneurons are the one that's located in the spinal cord. And this interneuron will process the information and finally will produce the order or response. That order have to be carried by the fourth component, which is the motor neuron. And the motor neurons conduct or carry that information into the effector. The effector will be the last component, mostly muscle and glands. Okay, and then that muscle or gland or that effector is actually the one that produce the action, okay, or respond based on the order that coming from the interneurons. In this case, that order is coming from the spinal cord. Okay, so this the 5 components of the reflex arc. Some clinical application for reflex. So the uses of reflexes. Reflexes are used to assess some condition in our nervous system, routinely performed in neurological testing. In patients with nervous system injury, location and extent of damage can be judged by testing this reflex. Okay. Effectiveness of anesthetic drug or during surgery can be assessed through this reflex testing too. Okay, an example of reflex testings are like a knee jerk reflex, okay, plantar reflex. So this is in the foot, okay. Bicep jerk reflex. This is on biceps, elbow joint. Tricep. This is also on the upper arm. Abdominal reflex. Ankle jerk reflex, and cremasteric reflex. So these are some reflex testings performed by physician to test the nervous system condition. We also talk about the ascending and descending tract in the spinal cord. So again, the ascending means up. So this is the tract that carry information up to the brain, okay, from the spinal cord up to the brain. Of course, it's going to be carry the sensory information, okay, sensory impulses. So it will be coming from the receptor first. Okay? So receptor, for example, in our skin, receive the stimulus, then that stimulus will be carried by the sensory neuron, go to the spinal cord. In the gray area, there will be interneuron that receive that information, and that interneuron will carry that information up. Okay, so the axon, we're gonna using the white matter of the spinal cord up to the brain. And it will actually stop in part of the brain is called the thalamus. So thalamus will sort the information that coming from receptor, and then there will be another interneuron that will carry that information from thalamus into the cortex, okay, the cerebral cortex. Remember, in the brain, this is the gray area. Gray area mean cell body, mean process. So this is the processing center of the brain, which is the cerebral cortex. Okay. So the axons of these interneurons that carry up information to the brain, this is what we call the ascending track. Okay. So this is the ascending track. Okay. This is another ascending track over here from thalamus into the cerebral cortex. So in the spinal cord, we have track, the ascending track. In the brain, you will also have white matter over here, which is also track. So track, example, the track is the one that carry information from thalamus into the cerebral cortex. So this is the ascending track. The second one is called the descending track. It is also known as a motor track because this one carry motor or order from the brain down to the spinal cord. Okay, so this is down track, brain to the spinal cord. Again, the processing center in the brain is the cerebral cortex over here. So the cell body of the neurons, interneurons in the brains, okay, will process the order, give the order, and the order will be brought by this interneuron, and this interneuron will go down to the spinal cord. Okay, you see, this is only one long axon over here compared to the ascending track. So this is the descending track over here. Okay, and they're going to use the white matter of the spinal cord to carry that information. And then from that, then there will be interneurons. And there will be motor neuron that receive the information, and that motor neuron will carry that information or order into the effector. In this case is muscle. Okay, so this is the descending track. Now, if we compare with an ascending track and descending track, you see that ascending track, it has two interneurons that involve bringing this track. Okay, while the ascending track is only have one interneuron that involved in this process. Both of them, okay, crossing over. It means that let's say this is the right or left skin, left side of our body. Okay, it's actually crossing over in the spinal cord over here, and it will go up to the right brain. Okay, it means that the right brain will process information from our left side of the body. Okay, it's always like that. Okay, it's crossing over. The right side, the left side of the brain is actually process or carry and get the information from or control the right side of our body. Okay, so this is how the brain works. Look at this motor neurons. Okay, the ascending track is going to be the same. This is the right brain. Okay, when it is giving the order, it will be also crossing over in the spinal cord, and it's actually order the muscle on the left side of our body. Okay, when you move your left hand, it is actually ordered by your right brain. Okay, now this one will compare this ascending track and descending track. Again, ascending track means going up. So if we count all the neurons that involved in the sensory informations in the ascending track, then there will be 3 total neurons involved in this process. Okay, the first one is the neuron that carry information from the receptor. So this is the receptor. There's going to be the first neuron over here. It's called the sensory neuron. Okay, and that sensory neuron become what we call the first order neuron. Okay. And then there will be interneuron that receive the information from the first order neuron or from the sensory neuron. That neuron will carry that information to the thalamus. Okay, so that neuron become the second order neuron, and this is the neuron that actually crossing over from left to the right or right to the left. And then there will be another neurons that receive that information in the thalamus and bring it to the cerebral cortex. That neurons over here is become the third order neuron. Okay, so total there is 3 neurons that involved in sensations. Okay, in process of sensory process. If we compare with the motor or order, there are actually only 2 neurons that involved in this order for action. So from the cerebral cortex to the effector over here, involving only 2 neurons. The neuron that's coming down from the cortex to the spinal cord, it will be crossing over. And that neuron is called the upper neuron. Okay, it's upper neuron. And then the upper neurons will give the information to the second neuron that will carry the order to the effector. That neuron is actually motor neuron. Okay, we know that neuron as a motor neuron, but in this case, it is going to be called as a lower neuron. Okay, so there are only 2 neurons involved, upper neuron and lower neuron. Upper neuron is actually interneurons, and the lower neuron is actually motor neuron. For the ascending track, the first order neuron is actually sensory neuron. Okay, the second order neuron is actually interneuron, and the third order neuron is also interneuron. Okay, remember interneurons are neurons that's located in the CNS, spinal cord, and the brain. The sensory neurons and the motor neurons are the neurons that's located in the nerve, in the peripheral nervous system. Now, this is locations of the white matter or the track. They have special map or location. So the dorsal part or the posterior part over here, the white matter on the dorsal area, the posterior area, all of them is actually white matter for ascending track. It is called the posterior column. So posterior columns, all of them have the track that going up. So this is the ascending track, posterior column area. It consists of fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus. Okay, and then spinothalamic tract, and the name is actually telling you this tract will be up because this is coming from spinal cord to the thalamus. Remember, thalamus is brain. So it's up from spinal nerve, spinal cord to the thalamus. So this is going to be ascending tract. It's gonna be this one of here, so the spinal thalamic tract. Okay, so this area over here is the white matter for ascending tract. It's called the spinal thalamic tract. And there is also spinocerebral tract. And again, the name is telling you this is ascending track because it is coming from spinal cord to the cerebellum, which is part of the brain. So it's going to be ascending track. So name actually giving you the idea about the type of the track. So the spinal cerebral tract, okay, this one over here. So the white matter in this area is a spinal thalamic tract or spinal cerebral tract. Now, how about the descending tract? Descending tract, which is down. And the name is actually also giving you the idea of the type of the tract. Look at this name, cortico. You see actually cortex of the brain. Go to the spinal cord. Okay, the name is giving you the idea what type of tract. So this is going to be descending because this is coming from brain cortex into the spinal cord. Reticulo, this is part of the brain going down to the spinal. So this is down track, okay, descending. Rubro to the spinal, spinal cord. So the name is giving you the idea about the type of the tracks. So ascending tracks will start with the spinal, okay, because this is spinal cord. Except the posterior column, okay? Posterior column, you have to know that posterior column, all of them is going to be ascending track. For the descending track, the name will telling you that the spinal will be at the end, okay? Corticospinal, reticulospinal, or rubrospinal. So where are these descending track located, okay? For the cortico spinal tract, it's going to be located here. So this is white matter area, and this is going to be for descending track. This is reticulo spinal, very close to the gray matter, and this is the rubrospinal. This is also descending track. So this descending track, descending track. This is descending track. This ascending track. Okay. Just for information, both of side will be going to be the same. So you're going to have this ascending track. There will be descending track over here. Descending track, reticulospinal, rubrospinal over here. Okay. And then spinal thalamus tract, and the spinal thalamic tract. Okay, so it's going to be mirror, okay, between left and the right side of the spinal cord. These are the tract, which is the white matter. Now, what they bring, or what kind of information that they carry, whether sensations or order. Okay, so ascending tract carry sensations, okay, sense information or sensory information. Remember, these two over here are the posterior column. Okay, so this is posterior column tract. They mostly carry the information from muscles, tendons, joints. Okay, so this area, the posterior column, mostly carry information for balance. So we're able to do balance because of the information carried by this posterior column. If our posterior column have problem, then we might not be able to walk very well. Okay, so maybe have problem when we are walking. So the police might be testing your balance, and they will ask you to walk on the line, for example. So the information of balance is carried by the posterior column, which is the ascending tract. Okay. Now the spinal thalamic tract, from spinal cord to the thalamus, they mostly carry informations about pain, temperature, which is whether hot or cold. If somebody touch you, the information will be carried through this spinal thalamic tract. Okay? So pressure on your body and etc. And the spinal cerebellar will carry the information also from the muscles, okay, muscle movements, lower limb movement to the cerebellum. Cerebellum is the center for our balance over here. Okay? So the posterior column and spinal cerebellum will work together to control our balance, because this posterior column will also go to the cerebellum to give information about our body positions. Now for the descending track, this is the one that bring the order or motor order. Corticospinal, so its name is telling you it's coming from the cortex. So if it is coming from the cortex, then the receptor mostly will be the skeletal muscle, because this is going to be voluntary action. Okay, coming from cortex will be voluntary action. So that information will go to the skeletal muscle. Reticulospinal and rubrospinal is give some balance information to some effector. For the reticulospinal, they might also give information to the glands, okay, like sweat gland, for example. When we do exercise, then the sweat will be produced because of this information carried by this type of descending motor neuron, the reticulospinal tract. The rubrospinal will carry also information to the muscle for muscle coordination. Some clinical application for this tract and spinal cord problems, examples. So ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It's also called as Lou Gehrig disease. And this is usually affect the motor neuron, involve the degeneration of motor neurons in the spinal cord, brainstem, and cerebral cortex. Possible causes may be overactive of microglia that kill neurons. So remember, microglia is a type of neuroglia that help us to protect against disease. However, this microglia may be also attacking our own cell, in this case, the neuron. Okay, so this microglia overactive. So this is hypersensitivity of microglia that kill the neurons or build up the oxygen-free radical that neurons or astrocyte cannot counter. So this is maybe the reason why there is a sclerosis or damage in the area due to of this process. Symptoms for the ALS: speaking difficulties, dragging food, so weakness of the foot, clumsiness, fatigue, coordination issue, muscle twitches, and also weakness. Okay, this is some sign and symptom of ALS, sclerosis on the spinal cord. The cognitive function usually remain normal. Okay, thinking and is considered as the same as a normal people. Usually this disease or abnormality fatal during 2 to 5 years old of age, okay, due to the respiratory problem. So many patients of this disease, they might die during this time due to the respiratory problems. 10% of the cases is inherited. Okay, so far there is no cure for this ALS. Spinal cord injury This is the injury that takes place in the spinal cord. Most common cause is on the workplace or motor vehicle accidents. Severity depends on the extent and location of the damage. Compression or distortion of the spinal cord can result in damage to or death of the neurons, leading to pain, weakness, loss of sensation, and maybe muscular atrophy. The CNS neurons do not regenerate. Remember that. So neurons in the CNS, they will not be able to divide or reproduce. When they die, that's finished. That's done. Okay, there will be no reproduction of neuron or division of neurons in the CNS, spinal cord, and the brain. If the injury is happening in the ascending tract, remember this is the one that carries sensation, then the sensation will be lost. Okay, so loss of sensation due to this injury on the ascending tract. If the injury is on the descending tract, then what is the result? Paralysis, because descending tract is carry the organ. So there will be no action, especially muscle action. So it's gonna be paralysis. So this is how the researchers try to do some research, like a stem cell research, for example, to know whether the neuron can be grown or not. I think that's all for this spinal cord. See you again on the next lecture. Goodbye now.